everybody. I also acknowledge that we are meeting on the land of the Gadigal people and acknowledge also that it is Aboriginal land, always was, always will be. I apologise for speaking sitting down. It's not my usual practice, but I'm just recovering from surgery and I'm a bit weak and I'm not sure I could stand for 25 minutes. But I really mean no disrespect to this audience. I want to start by making two matters clear. First, while individuals clearly can and do play a significant role, history is made by people, by the masses. I therefore find relatively little value in viewing the Russian Revolution through the prism of Lenin, Stalin, and/or Trotsky. I respect scholars who work on these influential figures, and I loathe the anti-communism that lies behind much of the discussion and writings about their actions, especially those of Stalin. Secondly, I reject Francis Fukuyama's view that the collapse of the Soviet Union meant, and I quote, liberal democracy has triumphed and mankind has reached its highest wisdom. History has come to an end, unquote. The collapse of the Soviet Union was presented by the defenders of capitalism as the final victory of the free market economy over communism. We won, exclaimed the editorial in the Wall Street Journal of the 24th of May, 1989. It amuses me that supporters of capitalism, when they proclaim the end of socialism, so easily and conveniently forget how many decades it took this particular socio-economic formation to overcome feudalism and establish itself. I share Rosa Luxemburg's perceptive comment, written as early as 1900, that, quote, "It is impossible to imagine that a transformation as formidable as the passage from capitalist society to socialist society can be realized in one happy act. The socialist transformation supposes a long and stubborn struggle, in the course of which it is quite probable the proletariat will be repulsed more than once." With only 25 minutes, it's not possible to discuss the breadth of the revolution's achievements. So I'll limit myself to some comments on the economy and the position of women, and then a brief look at the Russian Revolution's impact around the world. In 1917, Russia was a backward, semi-feudal empire ruled by a Tsar, where vicious repression, exploitation, and grinding poverty ruled over the lives of the working class and peasantry. The Russian Empire contained many nationalities whose national sovereignty and languages were outlawed. Lenin called it a prison house of nations. Women's rights were non-existent. The revolution transformed it into a modern, developed economy, with a quarter of the world's scientists, a health and educational system equal or superior to anything found in the West, able to launch the first space satellite and put the first man into space. The Russian Revolution ended Russia's involvement in the imperialist mass slaughter of World War I. Russian soldiers went back to help overthrow the government that had sent them to fight and die. We can say that the Russian Revolution was the most successful anti-war movement in history. The revolution brought about sweeping land reform for the peasants, abolished capitalism, and created a socialist system that was capable of turning one of the poorest countries in the world into an industrial powerhouse, capable of smashing Nazi Germany and rebuilding after 2 major imperialist invasions to provide everybody with a guaranteed job, housing, education, and healthcare. It brought about big advances in women's rights and in national rights for oppressed minorities, forming republics of ethnic regions, legalizing their languages, and providing education in those languages, while also giving their economies special help through the planned economy. It also inspired millions of men and women who fought to bring it about. Mikhail Serafimovich, a private in the Guards Reserve Cavalry Regiment, sent this poem to a newspaper in 1917. "Long live free Russia! The joyous cry floods my soul. Long live our freedom! The red flag stills my heart. A leaden weight has fallen. The world dreams a shining dream. I'm young again, my body drunk, my soul replete with feelings as vast and endless as drops in the cup of the sea." Before the revolution, Tsarist Russia was an extremely backward economy with a predominantly illiterate population. Out of a total population of 150 million people, there were only approximately 4 million industrial workers. On the basis of a nationalized planned economy, within 2 decades, Russia had established a powerful industrial base, developed industry, science, and technology, and largely abolished illiteracy. It achieved remarkable advances in the fields of health, culture, and education. It was a nationalized planned economy that dragged Russia into the modern era, building factories, roads, and schools, and educating men and women. Electricity, running water, literacy, and food security were brought to the people of the Soviet Union. And don't let us forget that all this was achieved at the time when the Western world was in the grip of mass unemployment and economic collapse in the Great Depression. Despite the terrible destruction of the Second World War, the Soviet Union increased its GDP 5 times over from 1945 to 1979. In 1950, the GDP of the Soviet Union was only 33% that of the USA. By 1979, it was already 58%. By the late 1970s, the Soviet Union was a formidable industrial power, which in absolute terms had already overtaken the rest of the world in a whole series of key sectors. The Soviet Union was the world's second biggest industrial producer after the USA, and was the biggest producer of oil, steel, cement, tractors, and many machine tools. All this was achieved virtually without unemployment or inflation. Unemployment like that in the West was unknown in the Soviet Union. In fact, legally, it was a crime. Moreover, in most of the post-war period, there was little or no inflation. Before perestroika, the last time meat and dairy prices had been increased was in 1962. Bread, sugar, and most food prices had last been increased in 1955. Rents were extremely low. The Bolshevik Revolution laid the basis for the emancipation of women, and it is undeniable that women in the Soviet Union made colossal strides forward in the struggle for equality. women played a large part in the revolution. Soldatki, soldiers' wives, demonstrated to demand food, state support, and respect. Becoming more radical as the revolution advanced, they began breaking into homes and requisitioning any luxury items they thought undeserved. A flour trader who did not want to offer them his goods at a discounted price was beaten up by a band of soldatki. Milliners in Smolensk, mostly young Jewish women, went on a fierce strike for an 8-hour day, a 50% wage increase, a 2-day weekend, and paid holidays. A Muslim convention in May in Moscow was attended by 900 delegates, almost a quarter of them women. When a man asked why men should grant women political rights, a woman answered, "You act as though you can grant us rights. Rather than that, we shall seize them." The 1919 programme of the Communist Party proclaimed, quote, "Not confining itself to formal equality of women, the party strives to liberate them from the material burdens of obsolete household work by replacing it by communal houses, public eating places, central laundries, nurseries, and so forth." Between 1917 and 1927, a whole series of laws were passed giving women equality with men. Women received equal pay, special maternity laws were introduced banning long hours and night work, and establishing paid leave at childbirth, family allowances, and childcare centres. Abortion was legalised in 1920, divorce was simplified, and civil registration of marriages was introduced. The concept of illegitimate children was abolished. The number of women in higher education as a percentage of the total rose from 28% in 1927 to 43% in 1960 to 49% in 1970. In the words of Lenin, quote, "In the literal sense, we did not leave a single brick standing of the despicable laws which place women in a state of inferiority compared with men." The Russian Revolution exerted a profound influence. The slogan, "Peace, bread, and land," had an enormous appeal in a war-torn and impoverished world, suffering from the exploitation and oppression of capitalism and the war which it had imposed on the world. An alternative to capitalism had emerged. Humanity had had dreams of justice, equality, and plenty for millennia, but now these were no longer hopes and dreams. They were being translated into practice, into reality. Socialism as an idea in Australia became much more popular and influential. One example of this was the adoption by the Labour Party in 1921 of the socialist objective. Out of the various factors of the time and the influence of the Russian Revolution, the Communist Party of Australia was formed in October 1920. In the United States, a Communist Party was also formed, which went on to lead the labour movement of the 1930s, including the groundbreaking 1934 Minneapolis and San Francisco general strikes, and the formation of the militant industrial CIO union, all of which forced the Roosevelt administration to make some big reforms in favour of the working class, which included social security, a minimum wage of 40 cents an hour, the 40-hour work week, outlawing child labour, and the Works Progress Administration, which created 2 million jobs for the unemployed. Lenin's program for the liberation of oppressed nations and races also had a profound effect. It made American socialists see that blacks were doubly exploited and oppressed, and that a program of special demands was needed to address black oppression. In Australia too, communists and others were inspired to begin developing special policies on national rights for the indigenous First People of this land, and to start taking action for land rights. The ideas of the Russian Revolution inspired important leaders in the Third World, including Ho Chi Minh, Patrice Lumumba, Amilcar Cabral, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, and many more, who would develop these ideas through reflection on the revolutionary processes in their particular national conditions. The Soviet Union lent important material support to the national liberation movement by doing things like giving the Vietnamese people military aid to help defeat the USA. The USSR also in the early years undermined the US economic blockade against Cuba, trading with Cuba and giving fairer prices for its sugar than capitalist countries offered. Today, the ideas of the Russian Revolution are alive and well, for example, in South America, in the debates about socialism in the 21st century, and in the struggles of the peoples of Venezuela, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and other countries for their independence and sovereignty. The revolution gave inspiration for profound changes in China and in Yugoslavia, North Korea, East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, and Albania. Each of these revolutions was an improvement in overthrowing capitalist dictatorships, ending the exploitation and control of imperialist capitalist nations, implementing socialist economies, greatly improving women's rights, and in general meeting human needs like healthcare, education, nutrition, employment, and housing. China, for instance, doubled life expectancy, saving the lives of some 408 million people. It was the example of the Soviet Union that helped inspire the working class of Western Europe to fight for social progress that included some victories like socialized healthcare. Today, capitalism has entered into the most serious crisis since the Great Depression. Millions are faced with a future of unemployment, poverty, cuts and austerity. Wars and conflicts ravage the entire planet, the very future of which is placed in jeopardy by the impact on the environment of the uncontrolled market economy. The worldwide crisis of capitalism is giving rise to a general questioning of the market economy. There is a revival of interest in Marxist ideas, which is alarming the bourgeoisie. The new campaign of slanders is a reflection not of confidence but of fear. No effort or expense has been spared in the attempt to blacken the image of the October Revolution and the nationalised planned economy that issued from it. The October Revolution radically abolished private ownership of the means of production. For the first time in history, the viability of a nationalised planned economy was demonstrated, not in theory but in practice. Over 1/6 of the Earth's surface, it was proved that it was possible to run society without capitalists. Despite all the problems, deficiencies and crimes, which the history of capitalism provides in great abundance. The most astonishing advances were achieved by a nationalized planned economy in the Soviet Union in what was, historically speaking, a remarkably short space of time. The unprecedented advances of the Soviet Union represent not only a historical achievement, but provide us with a glimpse of the enormous possibilities inherent in a nationalized planned economy. They stand out in complete contrast to the crisis of the productive forces of capitalism on a world scale today. The Russian Revolution was a historic event of lasting importance for humanity. It inspired and inspires people of the world who saw in it the real possibility for ordinary people to develop structures of political action and to seize power. It would henceforth be known that the world need not be ruled by the rich. Whether you are in favour or against the October Revolution, there can be no doubt whatsoever that this single event changed the course of world history in an unprecedented way. Here, for the first time, millions of ordinary men and women overthrew their exploiters, took their destiny into their own hands, and began the task of transforming society. That this task was diverted along channels unforeseen by the leaders of the revolution does not invalidate the ideas of the October Revolution, nor does it lessen the significance of the colossal gains made by the Soviet Union for the 70 years that followed. I will finish with a small extract from a poem by Alice Meynell, written in England in the 1930s, which illustrates how the Russian Revolution and its socialist ideas inspired and still inspire so many millions around the world. Socialism, comrade, is in the hands of men. It is with us, though it fade and fade again. Socialism, comrade, is like the red, red rose. Day by day it opens, and day by day it grows. Its roots are ever spreading, and its sweetness never goes. And soon, I think, its petals will the whole wide world enclose. Thank you.